One thing we polymer clayers love to do is imitate other materials. Hi there, I'm Sandy Huntress for Create Along. In this video I'm going to show you how to make a faux opal and put it on a beautiful necklace pendant with a matching bail using supplies from the Faux Fabulous Create Along box. The first thing we're going to do is make our faux opal cabochon, and you'll need some sort of mold to make that in. You can use a purchase mold, such as this one from Sculpey, or you can use 2-part silicone molding putty and beads that are the right size and shape for your project. To prepare for making your opals, first you want to bake some polymer clay. Take a little bit of white and pearl and translucent. You may not need all of those, but I thought it would add depth and interest to have, I guess, a few different shades of white. And chop it up into little tiny pieces, just with your blade. You can chop it more after baking, but of course it's easier to chop it now while it's not cured. Go ahead and also take the molds that you're going to use and some scrap clay and just mold some cabochons with the scrap clay. We'll use these later on because we cannot bake the resin, so we'll need to use these as placeholders when we make our pendant. So bake your cabochons and then go ahead and bake your little bits of chopped up clay. For this project, I'm going to use UV resin. You could do this with 2-part resin, but 2-part resin takes a while to cure. Unless you have fast curing, we're going to do this in several layers. And to do it with the 2-part resin I have that takes 24 to 72 hours to cure, it would take days, if not over a week. This we can do in a relatively short time. You'll want to start with a layer of just plain clear UV resin in your cabochon mold. Just put a few drops in. We just want enough to coat the bottom of the cabochon. So pour in a few drops and then tilt your cabochon and use a toothpick is a great tool here. Just spread that all the way to the edges. If you're using sunlight to cure your cabochon, then you just need to have a place ready to bring this. If you're using a little UV light, then again you need to have that plugged in and set up and ready to go. Because as soon as you place this flat again, I don't know how well the camera picks it up, but the resin starts pulling away from the upper parts of the mold. I think I want another drop in there. It depends on the size of your mold. So you'll want to work quickly. Just get it all spread to the edges and then get it immediately under the light or out in the sun. So you have as much of this edge of the mold covered in resin. If you see any bubbles in your resin, do try to remove them or pop them before you put them under the light, because this is going to be nearly your uppermost layer of your opal, so you don't want any bubbles in there if you can help it. Once that layer is cured, now we can start adding some of the fun stuff. These are the opal flakes that came with the Faux Fabulous box. I don't really care for the orange and pink ones and even the yellow ones. I really just wanted the opalescent ones. So I dug through the bag, I pulled out the ones I liked, and I also kind of chopped some of these finer, just using a blade. And this is what I'm going to use to make my faux opal. So a few more drops of resin, and then go ahead and just add a pinch or so of the opal flakes. And use your toothpick to poke them down into the resin. Once you're satisfied with the look of that, go ahead and cure it again. At this point, this just looks like some resin with some sparkly flakes in it, but we're about to make it look more like an opal. When your clay bits come out of the oven, they'll look something like this. You can use your fingers and kind of break them up into small crumbles if they've stuck together, or use your blade to break apart any larger chunks. Use the interference green paint that came with the Faux Fabulous box to paint about half of your little bits with the interference green. I really think this has the look of opals. So if you look at a real opal, I think it has that kind of sparkly look. You could paint all of them with the green. Again, I'm just always looking for a little bit of variety. A few more drops of resin to your cabochon and add in your chopped up bits of clay and get those all in there. Now you can use resin to fill your cabochon mold up the rest of the way and then cure it one more time. One of the problems with UV resin, although it's wonderful and quick curing, is that if anything is blocking the light getting out the resin, it's not going to cure. That's why we needed to first do a clear coat on the whole thing, because there may be some bits of resin in here that are underneath the pieces of clay or even underneath the foils, the flakes that we added, that won't cure. But what we're going to do now is pop this out, and you'll see that it actually is, well, it's actually pretty cured. Sometimes it can be a little tacky on this side. Now, of course, that's not, yeah, there's a little bit that's not cured. You can feel it's just a little sticky. Now, at this point, what you can do is, if you have any rough edges, this one actually came out pretty good. There's a little piece. Just take your craft knife and smooth it out. Add 2 or 3 drops. Put them right in the center. Start with less, you can always add more. Use your toothpick to just coax the resin over to the edges. You don't want to actually scrape the toothpick over your cabochon. So if you find it getting too thin, that's already a little thin, just add another drop. Always start in the center. Just coax that resin all the way to the edges. When you're doing this coating, do plan to get your cabochon under the light or in the sun pretty quickly, because the resin will continue to run off and eventually you'll end up with too thin of a coat on it. So at this point we'll cure it again. Now there's one more step to really make these look like opals, and it's a super simple step. You just take your cabochons and add a nice thick layer of this green interference paint. It really gives the look of a real opal. So I don't even use a brush for this. A few drops depending on the size of your cabochon. Again, I'm using my toothpick and I'm trying not to scrape the back. I want a thick coat because brush marks and lines in the paint may actually show from the front. So bring it out all the way to the edges. And it's best to leave this for quite a while. It's a very thick layer of paint. Leave this like overnight to dry. Now you have beautiful faux opals that you can add to anything. And by the way, if you're thinking that this interference green paint would look wonderful, kind of swirled throughout the resin, giving the look of an opal, well, I thought of that already. But don't bother trying. You know how it's called interference? It means it interferes with the light, which means it won't cure. It will not cure. Maybe little teeny weeny bits of this in your resin will, but for the most part it simply won't cure. Somehow it interferes with the light. It doesn't work. Now go ahead and choose the color of clay that you want for your pendant and roll out a sheet on the thickest setting. Mine's about 2.5 millimeters thick. And I'm going to add a texture to mine. This is the Motion of the Ocean texture stamp by Create Along. I really love this one. And I'm going to use this template. I'm going to cut out the second largest one. This is the shape template number 10. I just love this shape. Use a nice sharp craft knife to just take your time. Keep your blade perpendicular to the clay. And especially when you're going around these tight curves, I kind of cut into the plastic a little. Just take your time. Decide which cabochon. And by the way, I recommend you work on a few at a time while you're making them and curing them. Make a few different shapes so you can kind of pick and choose. You can rub over your piece with some mica powder. I'm going to use this interference green paint. Just put a drop, kind of rub my finger in it, kind of get it sort of dried off, and now I can rub this over the texture. Choose a cabochon, press that lightly, So just so you make a bit of a mark there. And now pull out your stand-in cabochon. So this is one I baked in the same mold. And I'm going to brush this all over with Repel gel. You see, resin, I have baked Magic Gloss resin before and had it come out fine, but I've also had it come out quite yellowed and ambered. So I try to avoid baking it, especially doing something like a faux opal. I definitely don't want it to turn yellow. Go ahead and pop that in place. Roll out your clay into 2 lugs about 4 inches long and somewhere around 2 or 3 millimeters in diameter. Lay them side by side and just twist. This will be some trim around our cabochon. Go ahead and wrap that around. Now you can see why we needed a stand-in. So you got to have something in there to hold the place of your faux opal. Cut that in a diagonal. Now you can bake this whole thing, and because of the Repel gel, when it comes out of the oven, the pieces won't be stuck together. And here's this one out of the oven. Let's see how this looks with our opal. Oh, that's going to be really pretty. Let's go ahead and make the bail for our piece. I'm going to roll out some clay on a number 2 setting, which is about 2 millimeters thick. And we're not going to use the texture quite yet. You're going to cut out the 3rd largest template shape from your shape sheet. We want this one just a little bit thinner than the pendant because we're actually going to bend it in order to make our bail. To give the edges a nicer finish, take a piece of parchment paper, or this is a bit of deli sheet, place it over your clay and use your finger to bevel those edges. It will just soften them and make them look so much nicer and more finished. And because we're doing this step is why we didn't texture first, because of course you'd be rubbing away all your texture. And you see how that just looks so much more finished and just nicer, more complete. So go ahead and do that till you have a nice smooth edge all around. Now you can take your texture sheet, kind of like that bit, and roll nice firm pressure from one end to the other. Now there is some distortion just because we rolled right over the edge. What I found works perfect is to take your acrylic roller. If you have a different shape, use a different tool, whatever will work, but this works really well for this. To go in there, this edge is okay. Rub that with a little bit of the paint or mica powder or whatever. This one looks like it definitely wants to be antiqued after baking. It has all that texture going on. And I went in a little heavy with that paint, but it adds a nice shimmer. Now we'll peel this up. And this is just part of a barbecue skewer. Going to wrap that around, meeting those pointy tips. Don't press them together quite yet. In order to make this function as a bail, what you need is a jump ring. I have here just an 8 millimeter jump ring. I'm going to put the split in between the tips so that when it's baked, this will be contained in there and will function as a bail. So just a few gentle taps and presses. We'll seal that up. You can pull your skewer out, and if you want, well, that cracked a little bit, you can curve it just a bit. I think it looks nicer with a little bit of a curve. Here's one I made for the blue one earlier. I really think it looks nice, and you can use either side, whichever you think looks better. This one has, because it isn't a perfectly symmetrical shape, these edges show, and if you don't like that, use the other side. So that's your bail. To add a backing to your piece, roll out some clay on the third thickest setting, or about 1.5 millimeters thick. Roll in your texture. This time you're going to cut out the largest template shape for your backing. So flip this over, and now you can apply your baked piece. Of course, we won't be baking that, so we'll take that out. Twist together 2 more cords of clay, just like you did for the bezel, only make them a little bit thicker. Be sure to add some liquid clay between your baked piece and your unbaked backing piece. And now you can add your trim. And in spots, this looks like it's going to be thick enough. I don't need to trim it, but like on this corner, on some of these edges, I will need to. So just make those judgments. To trim this nice down here at the point, get it shaped in there, bring it down. And then take your blade and draw like a straight line down through the center, and that's where you want to cut. Leave that out of the way. My cord, I did it in haste, so it is not as even as it could be, but you get the idea. Do the same thing on this side. Nice straight line. There. Meet those back together with possibly a little liquid clay if you need to make them meet neatly. Make that all tidy all around. Use your blade. And I kind of have it angled here to trim this excess. Go ahead and trim on the other side. Add paint, mica powders, etc. as you like. Once it's baked, you can glue your cabochon, your faux opal, back on. Glue the frame around it. Add your bail, and there you go, a very unique art piece. Again, this is Sandy Huntress for Create Along. I hope you enjoyed this and you'll take it and explore and make it your own. Happy creating. Bye-bye.